Over to you.
Thanks, Baxter. And it's a real privilege to have a bit of time to interact with you. We've got some very eminent and wide-ranging participants here today. I just wanted to pick up on that last question that I fielded earlier from Anthony about whether we're going to see transition. And I was just reflecting on that rather ad hoc comment about future 20 years' time, and that it'll be just a normality that we'll have autonomous services. And for those of us that are old enough to remember 20 years ago, just think, what were you doing 20 years ago? You might well have been at school. Some of us were 20 years out of university. So I was a VP at Nortel Networks, and we were planning the building of the internet infrastructure, but it was a long way off for the pervasive services that you see now. 40 years ago, I was studying medieval Spanish and had to go and use a coin box to call my family. That seems a long time ago as well. But when we're looking at these sorts of trends, I just want you to think about the whole span of time that we're in. And autonomous vehicles is not some amazing exclusive technology curve. It's a technology curve similar to many of those that we've already lived with. And I don't think there's anything here that is going to greatly vary from the diffusion curve of other technologies that we've seen. But I would like to take a fairly broad view. I'm going to be coming to you for questions pretty early on in this process. And if that goes well, we'll carry on. If not, we've got plan B. So first of all, I'd like to ask Ahmed, if I may, just to open it up with a sort of holistic view, because you've got obviously a significant history in the municipality and the RTA and so on. How do you see autonomous vehicles contributing to the holistic goals for the smart city and for our shared environment here?
So, as you said, autonomous vehicles is probably the next revolution in transportation. I think a lot of cities, just like any time you have a new technology, a new revolution, start off with being very apprehensive. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Shall we take a wait-and-see approach? I think in Dubai we have proved that we prefer to take action, and we prefer to be positive, and we prefer to be ahead, if you like, of the ball game. So from our perspective, we have believed a long time ago that autonomous vehicles is going to be the next revolution, and we want to be, as part of our smart city strategy, if we want to become the smartest or one of the smartest cities in the world, then we definitely need to be in the forefront of cities that are ready to accept autonomous vehicles. A lot of debate still going on around how many years is it going to take for us to really see autonomous vehicles in operation on the roads, moving people as part of their daily lives in cities. Again, that's a question that you'll get different answers from even today, depending on who you speak to, how positive they are, how apprehensive they are. That's not the real question. The question is, as cities, if we want to become smart and smarter, and we want to contribute to the ease of mobility of people in our cities, the inclusiveness, as was mentioned in the previous presentation, it's very important that we are ready. The technology is evolving, there's no doubt. Billions and billions of dollars are being invested by manufacturers and operators to bring autonomous transportation to life. The key question is which cities will be ready or will be keeping up or ahead or keeping up with the technology, so that when the technology is ready for deployment, the cities are also ready. That's when you will have operation. How many years? It's debatable. The key question for us is, as Dubai, we need to be ready, and we need to be at the forefront of cities if we want to achieve our targets to become one of the smartest cities in the world.
Thank you. Coming over to Chris, we were talking just before we came on, and I had to ask Chris how old Uber is, because I couldn't really remember. 7 years, it turns out. And how many drivers in the UAE altogether?
So in the UAE, we've got about 5,000 operating in Dubai itself.
And you've become a verb to Uber, which is always a test. Uber, Hoover, and a few others that have actually made it into the language, but you've made it rather quicker than Hoover did. So autonomous, what's that going to do to the Uber model?
So I think So like you said, Uber launched 7 years ago, and our mission 7 years ago was to try and move people from A to B in the most efficient, safest, and most affordable way that we could do that. And we've kind of evolved over time in looking at ways that we can use the current infrastructure and ecosystem that we have in different cities. So that evolved from, in the very early days, using a licensed black limousine in San Francisco to various states in the US and in Australia, moving all the way down to kind of a ride-sharing model where anyone with a car can get licensed, within a couple of hours and then start using their car to transport people. And then there are various kind of models in between depending on which city you operate in. And so as we went through that process and we thought, well, how can we actually make this more and more efficient? It was clear that autonomous vehicles were going to play a part in that. I think there was a study in the US that said if you could make all road transportation autonomous and shared, you could potentially take 90% of the cars off the road. So there's a huge opportunity to start getting involved in this. And Uber has a team called the Advanced Technology Group that are tasked with kind of thinking about the future and thinking about the way that transportation is going to evolve. And this was something that came up early. So we are now in a position where we have 2 test markets that are live. One is Pittsburgh, the other is Phoenix, Arizona. We just got the licenses earlier this year for San Francisco. So there's a couple of cars in San Francisco starting to do the early mapping work that's needed before we start rolling cars out. And to date, we've done about 1 million miles of autonomous driving and about 30,000 actual trips. So to Ahmed's point around actually starting to transport people, Uber's in a very fortunate position that we've already started doing that. So actually you can request an autonomous Uber in Pittsburgh and in Arizona, and today we've done about 30,000 of those trips.
So you got any date projection on when we can get an autonomous Uber in Dubai?
I think the important part is...
It was a cheeky question, wasn't it, really?
So it's funny, the nice thing about Uber and the nice thing about the infrastructure that we have a network. So you can, when you open up the app, you say, I'm here, I'm going to there. And so Uber knows the route that you're going to take, and we can advise which route is the most efficient. And so we can actually start to deploy cars in cities and use that network to our advantage. So we can say, well, this car has been tested to work in these types of conditions. It knows these types of road surfaces, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are taking a trip within an area that car can handle, we can dispatch you a driverless car. If you're actually taking a trip a little bit further afield or out of that area, we'll dispatch you a regular car. So we can actually use our network to start slowly building up and up and up the number of cars we have, the types of conditions that they're used to. We don't have to have a one-size-fits-all solution from day one, which I think is really important.
Okay, so I'm going to go for a question in a minute. So if we could start a handing waving process, we'll get a microphone to you. In the meantime, I'd just like to say that Chris has got 50 Teslas out in the UAE, and any of you want to go home in one, now would be a good time to start thinking about it. I'm going to come to Yusuf and Martin in a minute. What we have here, Yusuf speaks for Mazda, responsible for the development of the world's first autonomous shuttle system, the world's most ambitious sustainable city. I'm taking all his lines. Martin represents AECOM, which is I think in many measures, depending you choose your KPIs, probably the world's most prolific infrastructure builder, or at least one of the top several. And essentially, he builds it, he owns it, he regulates it, he moves cars around it. I'm talking about it. You can go anywhere you want now. So let's actually have some interaction. And you don't necessarily have to have a clever question. Just say, let's talk about. And then, whatever the topic is, and we'll pick it up. Just tell us which way you want to go, because it's much more fun for all of us. You're not trying.
You've got one over there.
Oh, we've got one behind you. There we go.
Okay. Rada Salman from Dubai Municipality. I have 2 questions. The first one is, since you guys are into the transport subject and the transport area, so what would be, or what do you think that would be the single most breakthrough in the upcoming years until the 2020? 2020 is not so far, but what do you think the single most breakthrough that will be in the transport area? Is it the software area? Is it the vehicles area? Is it the electrical vehicle
Great
side?
question. Great question.
That's number one.
Oh, can we answer that one and then come number two? I'm not sure I've got the
Sure.
memory for number two, especially as I was going to suggest, are they linked? No. Okay, so can we all answer that one quickly? I'll go first. I'd say voice-activated or autonomous vehicle interface with voice recognition for charging. That's what I want.
I don't think that we're going to get to autonomous in 5 years to that extent. For us as Uber, at a very kind of simplistic level, we want to get more people in fewer cars. So we're really focusing on expansion of Uber Pool. So our kind of pooled ride service, which we have in London, we don't have here yet. We don't have in this region. So for us, I think we're looking at how do we make better use of the assets we already have rather than putting more cars on the road.
Yusuf, big hairy goal.
Yeah, if allow me, there is no one direct solution, and this is what we've been working in Masdar for a long time. It should be a mix of many things. So the infrastructure, as been mentioned in previous presentation, is very important. So the city need to be walkable, need to be using transportation, public transportation. So there should be increase in the infrastructure of public transportation, increase the number of stations. Today, I understand some people may be next to the tram station, but some are too far. So we have to bridge this gap also between the consumers. So it's an end-to-end solution. And in Masdar, we are trying to link all these aspects. So by the time you arrive to Masdar city, you don't need to use your transportation. So we will make sure that you can travel inside Masdar city in an easy way and in a very sustainable way. That's why, as you said, Paul, that we started with the autonomous cars.
So the question was about by 2020, since you happen to be managing the UAE presence at Dubai 2020. Are you able to say anything about the autonomous aspects of that pavilion?
Actually, it's just public information. There is nothing. We are mandated to manage the construction of the UAE pavilion and the Expo, and we are going with the high standard specs to deliver this pavilion. It will be a LEED Platinum pavilion, and we're trying to use as much as we can UAE material here and a new technology where can the UAE present it and to be part of the Expo initiative for 2020.
Brilliant. Martin.
That's been designed by Santiago Calatrava, which is a well-known designer around the world. He won the competition, and we started already the construction.
Okay, so I'm going to go for something slightly different. I'm going to say that whilst all this technology sounds great and it's all designed to make our lives easier by moving around, I think there's going to be a move towards a more sustainable planning. If you think about, there's a lot of rankings of different cities around the world. You'll know probably about the Livable Cities Index. And the cities that are top of that index are not necessarily the cities that have the best highway infrastructure or the highest number of Uber vehicles that are driving around. It's not necessarily done on that. There is a scoring for it, but it's more about how do people feel when they're in that city. How easy is it for them to do what they need to do. So I think we're going to see more of a move towards this more integrated planning that takes transport as one of those aims, but also thinks about how we as humans want to interact with our environment. So I'm a great believer in autonomous vehicles, and I really want to see public transit and freight. It's probably the first two that I think will become truly autonomous moving forward. And I believe I'm personally working on projects right now with autonomous public transit here in this city. So I know that there is a move towards this. But I don't think we should forget that we want to live in a livable city, that a city that we feel comfortable living in and that we can interact with everyone else there as well.
Great.
Yeah, sorry, just to comment on your question as well, maybe both questions. First of all, we, as part of our job in the RTA, we talk a lot to manufacturers. And I agree with what Chris mentioned earlier about car ownership. I think car ownership for them, or the model of car ownership, is a lot more worrying to car manufacturers than autonomous vehicles. And that comes from people questioning why they should own vehicles when they only use them a few hours a day. And that's where, you know, concepts like car sharing and ride sharing come into play. So the next revolution, in my opinion, before autonomous vehicles, is going to be conventional vehicles with less car ownership and more mobility as a service, as opposed to people owning cars. And I think we're going to start seeing vehicle manufacturers go more into the model of, rather than selling cars to individuals, providing mobility services using their vehicles, which seems to be a more sustainable model for them going forward. The question of Uber and London, I think it's really about, at the end of the day, what people want. And for us in Dubai, I think we proved that we signed a partnership with Uber. And the reason we did that, the biggest motivation for us was that people want ride-hailing services in Dubai. And we made it happen. Yes, it did have an impact on other modes of transport. It did impact our normal taxi services. But at the end of the day, without going into too much details of the details of the partnership, we did sign a partnership agreement, and we made it happen because people in Dubai want ride-hailing services. And that's where the concept of putting people at the center of your planning and the happiness and the needs of the people, the government and private sector should work together to make what people want happen in cities.
Thank you. Great questions, both of them. We're with Baxter there, and then we've got another question just coming up here. And can you give me a wave if you're going to be in a queue? You're thinking of them now, one on the back. And so that's the next two. Great. That's someone at the front again. We'll go in that order. Thank you.
Hello, Ian Rose from Cracknell.
I didn't catch that. Neil Rose from where?
Cracknell Landscape Architects.
Oh, okay. I live in Bracknell, so hello, Cracknell. No. Great.
The question was, I was just interested in the panel, some of the panel's views on the likely impacts of the sort of adoption of autonomous vehicles on the spatial planning of our cities. How will the form of our cities change over time if autonomous vehicles becomes more part of how people move around cities, how goods are moved around cities, how services are provided in cities? Thank you.
Do you want that, Martin? Are you up for that?
I'll start, if you don't mind. Yes.
We'll go fairly quickly on these, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a great question, and it's something that is being considered right now. So if you take, for example, autonomous public transit that is being planned, typically this is being planned in segregation, so separated out from the existing highway and footway space. The real challenge is going to be when you start to integrate and start to mix autonomous vehicles with standard vehicles and standard population. So I think there's this transition phase where we might have certainly autonomous public transit vehicles running separately from other vehicles. And what that means in terms of planning is that's an impact on your right-of-way, on your space that you have between the buildings and that space that you need. And it requires some big decisions about, well, if you're going to take away that space from traffic and give it to autonomous vehicles, what is that impact? And there's a whole set of modeling exercises and planning exercises that need to run around that. So I think it's a really important question. The other element is that autonomous vehicles typically are powered electrically, and then we need to think about the powering of those vehicles as well. So one element would be, what about the charging stations? How are they going to be located around the cities? And are we going to start to see the introduction of highways with the charging plates built in them? So I think our cities are going to have to adapt, and there's going to be inevitably some growing pains as these changes take place. We're all thinking of perhaps 20, 30 years in the future where these cars may be very commonplace, but at this stage it's going to be, that transition phase is probably the most problematic because you probably need to keep things separate in this time frame.
So I'm going to be naughty moderator and comment myself, is that we've just won £19 million in London to build one of two. It's a project, it's in total £55 million was announced last week to build open road testing facilities and some fast track facilities for autonomous. It's all built on integrated traffic. We've finished testing the theory of segregated stuff, and there's a lot of connected vehicles in there. It's not all autonomous. But that build completes in March 2019, and we expect to be running mixed traffic in that sort of time frame with driverless cars mixed into the roads. And you'll get a lot of different stories depending who you ask. Generally speaking, the new entrants of the new money in automotive is going to go faster than the old money. And so I'd just watch the new money if I were you. Gentleman just there next to Carl Peter, thank you.
Ali Al-Mazmi from Dubai Silicon Oasis. Thanks a lot for the insightful panel discussion. My question is, actually I'm going to question the advancement of the standard and regulation for the autonomous car. Maybe a good example will be the electrical car in Dubai. I mean, the car were there for the last couple of years, but only the regulation or the standard, let's say, it was released recently. So are we forecasting the same trend for the autonomous car as well, or it will be much more advanced or much more, let's call it, matured enough, so the car can be sparked on the road?
Who'd like to go for that?
Yusuf, I think. I didn't quite get the question.
I can answer. Okay. To answer the question in the short term, that's why we are engaging in the early stage with the authorities during the implementation. So before we implement it, we have to test it with the authorities. So we work hand on hand with the authorities, and as we speak today, we already engaged with the authorities in the phase 2, which we're going to test it and announce it by January, which will go further beyond what we are testing today. So we're going to interact with the real roads, so pedestrian, cars, and this will be announced soon. So yes, the regularity will be with us. So by the time we implement it, we can have an approval. But there will be no individual implementation. This will be implemented in a large scale. It's not an individual, so you don't need a license or authority to approve individual. We are going to approve the concept itself and how safe it is to be used in the public areas.
Thank you. I think we're at the back there, and just see you in the dark. Yeah.
Myself, Radha from Shapurji Palonji Group. My question may be 3 members of the panel. One may be solar related, another may be ECOM because of some quantification issues, and maybe with RT also. I am referring back to the Transit X referred by Mr. Michael before this presentation. He has shown some cable car arrangement running by movement by solar energy, and it is being tested somewhere. I want to know whether it can happen in the CBD along the roads in Dubai. So people leave their cars and go to the metro and come back to their houses by that arrangement. It will run by solar energy.
Well, I took a note of that one as well, and I'm going to get it in Greenwich before you get around to doing it in Dubai. It looks very interesting. But I think he said it's a concept. They haven't yet found their first test bed. So I guess we'll all have a look. I'd never heard of it before, and I work in this all the time. So I think we'll probably, I don't think we've got a view. Do you know anything about Transit X, Martin?
I don't know about Transit X, but I know about PRT systems in general.
Yeah, sure.
So personal rapid transit is what that system would be known as. There are probably half a dozen different systems that are being promoted similar to this around the world. In terms of what they're trying to promote is great. It's this point-to-point service, which is very admirable. The difficulties come when you have a large volume of people trying to use a system such as this. The difficulties tend to be more about the stations. So for example, if you had a school or a university with a lot of people leaving at one time, then the demand for those cars is very high, and everybody wants to get in their own individual vehicle, and that becomes an issue. So typically, as a transport planner, it's a very key issue, because if we can't get the people onto the system and the trains are blocking back, it causes issues downstream. So it's a solution. It's typically implemented in campus environments like a university or a business park. When you start putting it into real-world city examples, there tend to be more issues that come with that. But as you say, it's early stages yet in the development of these systems, but that typically is what the falling down point is on them.
Great stuff. Let's move on. Got another one ready?
Asim Zajjali from Al Moj Muscat, one of Majid Al Futim communities. Most of the solutions that are trying to address the long-distance commuting, and mainly which is across cities. As a developer, I would ask, what do you see are the, let's say, quick wins and key implementations within a development where communities, especially in large mixed-use development where you have big number of residents, you have a lot of facilities, whether it is sport facilities or commercial facilities. What key implementation and quick wins you think we can have within the communities?
Yeah, well, I think we'll have quite a few. Let's go quickly around on that. I think there are a lot of closed communities, and particularly if you look at the theme parks in the States, there's a lot of autonomous stuff out on the theme parks at the moment. In a closed community with an off-road, there are half a dozen that come to mind. And I think it is a quick win, but not as widely adopted as you might expect. So you want any quick comments from the panel?
Yeah, I think you have a very valid point. I think most cities around the world, Dubai included, are looking for quick wins. And I think the development communities, many of them, of course, here in Dubai, are or do represent potential quick wins for autonomous transportation systems that can be implemented fairly quickly with, for example, systems like shuttle buses, autonomous shuttle buses on a fixed route with minimal interaction, if you like, with actual cars, taking people within the different, if you like, services, residential, commercial services within a development community. Those technologies are fairly advanced. They are low-speed shuttle buses. We've done several trials with them here in Dubai. And we are possibly in a position, maybe within the next year, to start having some form of operation within development communities. So we are in touch with many of the leading developers in Dubai to bring that to life. I totally agree that those are potential quick wins. They also are opportunities to engage the public into autonomous transport systems, to measure how comfortable the public feel. Again, we should not forget the safety aspect and how people feel about getting into a vehicle that doesn't actually have a steering wheel or a driver. In our trials here in Dubai, we've taken that into consideration. We've done lots of face-to-face surveys with people who have used the transport systems on trial. Generally, the feeling has been very positive. People are very positive about introducing autonomous transport in the city. They feel that it will reduce traffic, it will be a lot safer, and generally people felt quite comfortable. Maybe that will not be the case in all cities in the world. So I think those represent opportunities also for engaging public who live in those communities to also feel more comfortable. I think the media has a very important role, I think we didn't talk about that, has a very important role to play in, if you like, projecting a positive impact and making or generating excitement in cities. A lot of what we read in the media around autonomous transportation trials is around accidents that happen. Now, yes, accidents do happen from time to time, but there's not enough focus around the rate of accidents per miles or kilometers of trials compared to normal conventional vehicles, which is probably a huge difference. I think there's a big role for the media to play in terms of generating excitement and bringing that safety aspect so that people in cities feel more comfortable and feel more engaged, and they want to actually bring this transportation systems to life.
The only thing I would add, and this is not necessarily directly related to autonomous, but in terms of quick wins, something we've been working with the RTA on for the last 6 months is a kind of first mile, last mile solution. So how do we better connect communities and kind of transport deserts to the nearest metro station or to the nearest bus station? And so there are a whole number of ways to do that. And one of the products we have in a lot of cities is UberX. And UberX is a low-cost ride-sharing product. It's not something we have here. The regulations mean we have to be more expensive than taxi and so on and so forth. So it tends to be, in Dubai, a luxury a product aimed at more of the kind of middle to upper class. And so how do we provide a solution that is safe, affordable, reliable, but the key bit being affordable, to make sure that people in outskirt areas, I live in Sport City, for example, can get a car at the tap of a button and easily take them to, in my case, Internet City Metro Station, and then take the metro down to downtown. So that project is still underway, but we're trying to figure out what is the best way to basically enable more people living in the outskirt areas to better connect to the public infrastructure that's already been built.
Yeah, I'd also just comment, I'm going next week, quite excited about going to a launch of what's called a new International Merchant City new build at Forley Waterside, which is in the UK on the Solent, just near Southampton. And that's designing a car-free new smart city with all the cars stored in what used to be the power station's turbine hall. So there'll be a 2,000 car central car park and everything designed to be walkable within 6 minutes. And I think that's a challenge, back to the developers, if I may, that it's a big ask to design something that is designed for people not to have their private transport near where they live, but to separate it. So you have a last mile solution, and then you have whatever your transit facility is, whether it's owned or whether it's shared, for that to be a little distance away and covered by a last mile solution. So I think there's a bit of chicken and egg, that the big wins will also come from new designs of development, and the benefits will come from environmental gains, but also potentially there'll be better use of land, especially in downtown areas. It could be a big deal to save on parking space, and then the big thing is to pass on that saving to the purchaser of the property, so that they can actually benefit from the efficiency of shared transport by not paying for parking spaces.
I think one of the risks, if I can just add to that, one of the risks we have, of course, is that by providing all this additional transport opportunities, it comes back to land use planning. And if it makes it easier for people to travel longer distances, it actually makes it easier for people to live further away from where their workplace is, where their school is, and so on. So this needs to be, it shouldn't be done in isolation. This should be a joined up approach, that you take your land use planning and your transport planning, and they should work in collaboration. Because the danger is that if you provide all these great transport alternatives, people can go, great, I can live further away from the city, and therefore it permits that spreading of the city into other areas, and you get that less efficient use of the city going forward.
Okay, last chance for an audience question. If you any here we go, got one ready. Thank you.
Mohammed Al-Alama from Dubai Trade. I have a question for Uber. Do you have any plans for Uber trucks or something about logistics?
For Uber,
for cargo.
So Uber Freight is something that's happening in the US. So we brought a company called Otto a year or so back, and part of that acquisition was they had built an autonomous truck. And we kind of took that technology and took that team and kind of rebranded it, and that's now called Uber Freight. Uber Freight is live in the US. It was launched quite stealthily probably about 6 months ago, but it's ramping up very, very quickly. Right now, that is not an autonomous system. That is using our platform to connect people that want to move something with people that have got a truck that can move it. But there is a lot of work happening in parallel with the Advanced Technology Group to bring the autonomous trucks that we're working on into that network. So kind of watch this space, but that's something very exciting within Uber that should be, I think, on the streets, or on the highways, I should say, more quickly than driverless cars will be rolled out.
So thank you for your questions. It's always a privilege to be here in Dubai, and to be able to sit here with the iconic brands of Dubai's own RTA and ACOM and Uber and Mazda is a privilege indeed. I don't think you could have a better lineup of future energy going into this sector. It's now all in the doing rather than the talking. So although it's great to be here talking about things, I hope that the next time we come back we'll be able to see really significant deliveries on the ground. We're really looking forward to the 2020 thing. We'll be meeting long before that, but the ambitions of having to lock technology and then to place it in to a fixed place, it's a bit of a moonshot really, isn't it? It's October 2020 sounds worryingly close, doesn't it? So we're looking forward to seeing the energy going into that. We hope to help support in some way, but also ride the wave of energy that's going to go into the next 3 years. And look forward to spending the rest of this conference with you, and I hope we'll all get the chance to talk to many more people individually. Thank you for your time.